All right. Hey, Rita, thank you so much for joining me on the Flipping Junkie podcast.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So this is a little bit of a different topic. I don't know that I've really talked a whole lot with people in detail about, what you've focused on with the out-of-state rehabbing. There's a lot of people doing out-of-state wholesaling, but the out-of-state rehabbing is a bit different. So I'm super excited to dig into that with you. If you would, just for everybody listening to know more about who you are and how you got into this business, would you mind sharing your story?
Sure. My name's Rita. I live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and my grandparents had rental properties. And unfortunately, I was not smart enough to get into the rental properties when my grandparents owned a duplex. I bought into the premise of getting a good job, going to college, and doing all that. So I took that route. I became a psychiatric nurse, of which I still am. I have a full-time job,
Oh,
but I
nice.
feel like I let a good life get in the way of having a great life. And swing back around, I called Social Security one day, which is why I got into real estate. And I made that fateful call to find out what, in fact, I would be entitled to down the road for my imaginary retirement. And I was shocked to find out the number when they told me it would be basically under $2,000. And I thought, there has to be a better way.
Yeah.
And I thought, let me go back and revisit real estate because I really was interested in building a passive stream of income. And that's when I started to get serious about real estate about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I bet that would do it. Like, how are you going to live on $2,000 a month in this day and age? And having that going. So once you decided, okay, well, real estate's going to be the thing. What did you do? Like, what were the steps to determining how you were going to go about it? How are you going to, like, what was your strategy going to be?
Well, as you know, there are two reasons to really do buy and hold, and one would be appreciation and the other would be cash flow. So I looked around at my market and I thought, it's pretty priced out. It's a very expensive market in South Florida. So that's what led me to start to explore different areas around the country in which I could thereby get a better cash flow. And it's really no secret. There are many markets around, and if you just go to local RIAs, you start hearing about the same markets that crop up. There's Buffalo, there's areas around Atlanta, Houston, Kansas City, Memphis, parts of the Midwest, Ohio. A number of different areas just start to become a recurrent theme. And I just researched out those areas and thought, let me try that. Let me do that out of state investing to go after the cash flow. If I get appreciation pop out of it, that's great. That will be the cherry on top, if you would. But I really was going after cash flow.
And so what kind of cash flow are you looking for with these?
I really like to get about 18% cash flow, buy and hold. My strategy is to purchase them and hold them forever. And I understand many of your audience are probably interested in flipping. And I think that's a great way to amass cash. But along the way, I thought it might be interesting for the listeners to also hear about how to keep one or two along the way. And while they are flipping, to build that pot of money to invest, why not think about building that portfolio and start to amass and keep one or two along the way?
No, absolutely. I mean, at a certain point, amassing the cash, like, it's best to invest that into something instead of just continuing this cycle of having to work and keep doing this, because as soon as you stop, the investments that you're making are short term. You got to keep doing it. You got to keep working. And after a while, even though it's exciting for most people for several years in the beginning, it's going to become a thing of where you're just kind of going through the motions, and having this longer term strategy is exciting because it's really compounding, what you're doing.
Absolutely. You're so right. And I didn't want to have another job. As I mentioned, I have a full-time job. So I was very serious about building that passive income, that passive stream. I didn't want to have another 30 or 40 hours of work to compound onto what I'm already doing. So I was very serious about that word passive. And in building my team, I really looked to incorporate that and make sure that I wasn't adding day-to-day tasks to my already busy life.
Yeah, that's big. Yeah. So how did you get started? What were your first, you chose, so you started initially from out of state, right? Your first one was out of state. Like, tell me about how that all went down.
Yeah, I did. I guess if there's a hard way or a harder way, I decided to take the hardest way that I could. My first one was out of state, but as I mentioned, I just heard different areas. I researched them out, and fortunately for all of us, we are investing in the best time available in that we have so much available research available on our phones or on our iPad. We can do so much research just by the comfort of our home. So we can research out the crime statistics, the schools, the population, what type of businesses are around. So that was my first step, to just do some basic research. And really that part was pretty easy, to narrow down where in the country I wanted to jump into. So we're very fortunate to be able to just hit Google Earth and be able to find any street around and view the properties virtually without having to go there and have the expense of a plane ticket and going there and all of that. So it's really in our best interest to utilize the great tools that we have at hand.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So you did that and you narrowed down. Where was that first one at? Where did you decide to
I,
begin?
I narrowed it down between Buffalo and Ohio, and I decided to jump into Ohio just because it was a little bit closer to where I live and in Florida. And I thought if I ever need to go there. So I jumped into Ohio, and then I thought, well, I first need to put my team together. And first and foremost, I thought I need a realtor. And really, realtors are not all created equal. As you know, we can just make a number of phone calls, and some will be responsive to our needs as investors and some will not. So I made a number of different phone calls, tried to find one. Some advised getting a realtor that's also an investor. My realtor does not happen to be an investor, but I just really wanted to find someone that was hungry, and that's what I went after. I went through about 2 realtors until I found one that was really responsive to my investor needs, understood the criteria I was looking for, and then he would just start feeding me deals, and I put alerts on my phone, and I would see a property perhaps, and I would forward it to him or vice versa. And then we just started going through the different MLS. And that's the other advantage of buy and hold, in that I can buy off of the MLS. It's not quite as difficult to find property. We don't need to find the lowest rock bottom price because I am holding for forever, for 30 years. So while I like to negotiate, I can certainly pay market or a little bit below market and still have that profit margin.
Yeah, because you're basically going on that certain percentage that you talked about of cash flow. If you can cash flow it at that, then you're good. So so it looks like you really focused on helping single moms through Section 8 program. Can you talk about how that came up and your decision to kind of focus on that?
Yeah, I put together my team of realtor, and then I needed to have a contractor, and I needed to look for a property management company. And then I started, we're all kind of familiar with the Section 8 program in that we've heard it around a little bit. And I used to live in Baltimore where the Section 8 program was pretty popular. And I thought, there's some benefits to that in that we're getting a guaranteed check every month. So I called around to see if my area supported Section 8. They certainly did. There was a demand, as is pretty much in every city. So if you're investing in whatever city, you can pretty well be guaranteed that there's going to be a shortage of housing, and most especially a shortage of affordable housing. So I jumped into the Section 8 program, which was pretty easy to do. You just kind of apply, put your name, your home up on a Section 8 board, and then the tenants select your home. And it's typically Section 8 moms, in that most of the tenants are not married. They have young children. So I'm very proud and excited that at this point, I'm able to help 21 single moms have safe, affordable housing. And one of the benefits to the Section 8 program is that the moms typically put their children in your local school system. So moms don't like to move around a lot. So you have another built-in longevity in terms of the tenant. The moms typically would like to stay there 10 or 12 years while their children complete the school system.
Yeah, it's awesome. So let's get back into, the logistics of doing this remotely out of state. So you got a listing and you said, okay, I want to make an offer on this because the numbers make sense for what I can rent this for through Section 8 or however you're renting it. And it meets my cash flow criteria. So I'm going to make this offer, try to purchase this property. How did you, how did you cover this whole idea of how much the repairs were going to cost? I mean, did your realtor give you that? I mean, how did you handle the estimate of repair for the property?
What I first started to do was get a property manager, and I had to call 10 different property managers before I could find one that would be willing to work with Section 8. I think in my area, there were only 3 property managers that were willing. You know, the stereotype is that Section 8 can be a little bit more difficult to handle and deal with. So not every property manager would be willing to handle the Section 8 program, but I found 3 that were. I interviewed them, and then I call back as though I were a tenant to see how they would handle phone calls from my future tenants. So I wanted to hear not only how they were trying to impress me on the phone, but I wanted to hear how they were going to handle a tenant. And I selected one of the property managers, and then they started to, as we all know, upcharge a little bit on the rehabs and the repairs. And I wasn't real happy with that. So again, I took that function away from my property management company and said, you know what, I can find my own contractor. So in answer to your question, I started out with the property manager and the contracting. I didn't like the upcharges, and it's within our total right to say, okay, property manager, you can collect the rent. However, I'm going to find my own contractor. And that's what I did. And what I found are rock stars will lead us to other rock stars. So I would ask for referrals from my realtor. Hey, do you know any good contractors? I would ask for referrals from my title company. And everyone I would run into through the phone, I would ask, and I found a couple of good contractors, and that's who's been doing my rehabs.
Oh, nice. All right. So did you focus a lot in that one market, or have you been in a lot of different cities at this point?
No, at this point, I focus on one market just because I've built my team in terms of my realtor, my contractor, my property management company, my title company, and to diversify again, which is fine. I may do that in the future, but to diversify one more time, I would then again have to build my team in the other city. So at this point, again, I'm concentrating on that all important word to me, and that is passivity. And I really want this whole portfolio to be as passive as possible. I don't want to be dealing with 3 different property managers across. So I'm really trying to consolidate and keep it as local as I can. And so far, it's been working. It's working fine. I'm happy to say I'm 100% rented, and that's an important number, as we all know.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I mean, was that part of your research on the properties that you're getting? Is the the area and the rental rates, and just like how many places are for rent, how much is available?
Yeah, and all that information is available to us going to the local RIAs, going online to find that out. But really, if we're dealing with the affordable housing area, which all cities need that, you can pretty much be guaranteed you're going to be 100% rented, because as a country, we have such a shortage of safe, affordable housing that we're not talking about the high end of the market. We're talking about people who really need that lower end, class C, perhaps C minus property. And I found that there's a demand for it, and it's not been that difficult to, if you provide a good product that's clean, that's safe, that meets the Section 8 standards, you'll have people wanting to get in and lining up to rent the properties.
Okay. And have you had any turnover in the properties, people leaving and finding out you've got to do, I mean, because what are some of the gotchas, right? Like there's, if a tenant causes a lot of damage way over what the deposit is, and you've got to foot the bill for that. Have you experienced anything like that, or want to talk about anything, the gotchas?
Sure.
Like that?
Great question, because I think the stereotype is just that, you'll put a Section 8 tenant in and they'll trash your property. What I found, and every area is different, you need to explore and find out about your specific area. But what I found is if the tenant creates damage to your property, the tenant then risks losing their voucher for life. As a result of that rule, I found tenants to be very careful with the properties and very good tenants, because these are moms that have young children. They don't want to lose the roof over their head. So I have found the exact opposite to the stereotype, and that is that they're very good tenants. They're very careful. They do not want to risk losing the voucher for life.
That's a
But
good
some
point.
of the drawbacks would be, someone might look at it and say, well, you have an annual inspection by Section 8. And someone might look at that and say, well, that's an added inspection. It's added red tape. I look at it and I just turn it around and say, however, my properties will be up to code and up to speed as a result of that one inspection, that annual inspection. So I don't look at that as a negative. I look at it as, well, if something needs to be fixed, I want my properties to be kept up, and I'm not in them. So I look at it as, all right, these little things, maybe a chip paint or a guardrail needs to be put back up. I want those items to be fixed. And of course, the other item that people might look at as a negative is that there's an inspection before you're approved for Section 8. But again, do you want your properties to be up to code and up to speed? And I don't look at that as a negative, but it is another added layer, and it could be an obstacle to someone that's not too fond of inspections.
Yeah. Well, you know, what's awesome about that is it's probably limiting, you know, all these stereotypes and then all of this stuff where people have this negative opinion of these kind of inspections is limiting your competition, right? Which is a good thing for you, you know, so that's awesome. I like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how, like, you've done 21 single family residences in 11 months. How are you funding these deals?
Yeah, that was the biggest challenge. And I'm a pretty persistent person. So what I had to do to find a lender, I called so many lenders. I ended up calling 85 lenders.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did you find the lenders? How did you find a list of 85 lenders?
I just Googled them. I just sat down one day and wrote down a number of Florida lenders, and they weren't real thrilled with me because I was investing out of state. So then I called out of state lenders, and they weren't real thrilled with me because I lived in a different state and I was inexperienced. And I often look back and think, but what if I had stopped at phone call 84? What if I had not persevered and continued to find lenders? So I think if you're somewhat determined and somewhat, you know, have that perseverance factor, you can find lenders. And now I found that there are many more avenues to find lenders. But at the beginning, I was trying to find them all on my own. Now I know better to go to a local RIA, ask people, get on Bigger Pockets, ask people who they use. But back over a year ago, I was just compiling a list on my own and calling the 85. And finally, I found one willing to take a chance, and off and running we went. Nice.
Yeah, it was the 85th one. That's yeah, I think most people give up after 15. You know, and just be like, well, 85. That's like really digesting that. That's kind of you know, interesting, because each one of those takes work. Even, I'm sure, it's not like you just pick up the phone, you got in touch with them and said something real quick and they said yes or no. I mean, each one of those calls was probably quite a bit of work. Yeah.
Fortunately, I could just ask them, do you lend in this area? So in other words, I didn't have to provide all my financials to 85. I mean, that would have ruined my credit score totally just by that. So a lot of it was just question and answer. Do you lend in this part of the state? Would you lend with my credit score, which happened to be a decent credit score? But I recommend everyone to join up with some type of credit cleanup. I don't think anyone's credit score is beyond being fine-tuned a little bit. And that's another step that I took, just trying to get into this whole process of real estate, was just fine-tuning my credit and making sure that I had someone professional doing all of that.
Yeah. And so say again what you Googled again to find these lenders that you were calling.
I Googled lenders in Florida, lenders, nationwide lenders.
Just lenders.
Lenders, yeah. Portfolio lenders. I Googled small credit unions, just all the buzzwords that we hear: small credit unions, small lenders, nationwide lenders. I compiled a list of them and just started checking them off and going through probably every lender you've ever heard of. I've spoken to them. Hopefully they don't remember me.
Yeah. And so how did you, yeah, is there anybody that you preferred to speak to when you called these lenders?
I would ask,
let them direct you wherever.
Yeah, I would ask for the loan officer for a single family portfolio for investment homes. So after bungling through a few lenders, I kind of learned the buzzwords of where they would direct me to the appropriate loan officer.
Yeah.
And, they were all very nice with their nose, but, I was going to find one. My theory was if someone else has accomplished this, and I knew several people who had, and in a different podcast, I thought if anyone else has accomplished this, then I too can achieve this. And
Yeah.
that fueled me and that kept me going. So if I could be any inspiration at all to your investors, the fact that I've accomplished this without any experience, with a full-time job, bungled into this, don't be afraid of any aspect of it, of out of state, of buy and hold, of adding to your flipping portfolio. It certainly can be done, and it just takes some determination.
Yeah. No, I love that. And you didn't sit around and research forever trying to figure out who am I supposed to be speaking with. You just started making calls and said, well, figure it out, figure it out as I go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great. So as a part of this, what would you say if somebody was interested in doing this? What do you think is the biggest factor in your success of doing this out of state and having everything, work out for you?
I think my biggest asset was the fact that I was interested in self-educating. If you look at all the college courses we've taken over the years, I decided I'm going to self-educate. I'm going to give myself a PhD in real estate. And while I was in my action mode, I read over 50 books in real estate in my first year. I listened to over 300 podcasts in my first year. And I educated myself about all kinds of different aspects. I didn't even know what a self-directed IRA was. Well, I listened to podcasts and read books on it. I now invest within my self-directed IRA. So it was just a matter of self-educating. But I thought, I'm not going to sit on the sidelines. I'm going to get into my action step along with my education. So those two facets together really propelled me. I was not afraid of self-educating and studying hard, but at the same time, I thought, let me invest in one, and I learned so much by that. Let me invest in the second one. So I kind of coupled the action step along with the education. So I didn't want to get into that paralysis of analysis. I didn't want to sit on the sideline for 2 years and study. I thought, no, let me study at night, every night, but let me get out there and start purchasing. And I don't know anyone that has started in real estate and only owns one property. Once you get started, then all of a sudden you learn and it propels you. And I thought, okay, that's a good thing. Let me just try that.
Yeah. Start with the one and get through that. Yeah. And you didn't, like, listening to all those podcasts and learning all of that, you didn't, lose kind of focus, right? Like, you ended up with one strategy and you stuck with that instead of trying to do all this stuff that people are talking about, which can be tempting. And we use that as an excuse to not do anything because we're learning about this new thing. And then you learn that and you're like, well, it's easier to learn about this other new thing than it is to actually go and implement what I learned before.
Yeah, that's such an important point, is just to stay myopically focused on that one strategy. And while I noticed other strategies going on, wholesaling and this and that, I thought, no, my strategy is going to be buy and hold. And my strategy is going to be going for cash flow rather than appreciation. So I really stayed focused on those two strategies. And I thought, I'm going to go for single family homes. And I hear other strategies out there with multifamily, but I would not allow myself to get distracted. I thought, nope, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to learn that. And I really did stay myopically focused on that one cash flow, buy and hold, single family home, out of state, over and over. And then I got to the duplication phase, where once I was able to master one or two, I was like, okay, 3 and 4 is just doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, for sure. And what I want to go back though, because I want to go back to this whole thing of, just wrapping my head around this whole remote thing and, having these repairs done on these houses. Did you ever have any problems with contractors, anything happening? And then how did you resolve those issues, or how did you make sure that you minimized risks when having this work done?
Sure,
remotely?
I've had problems with contractors. I think that the word contractor sometimes can be synonymous with problems.
Yeah.
So I've certainly had my challenges with contractors. I've had contractors abscond with money, not a large amount because I'm smart enough not to advance, but sure, I've had people disappear in the night. The way I was able to safeguard that was once I learned enough that I had my property management company in place and I took the contracting piece away from them and I found my own contractor. Now I have that oversight where I can have my property manager go in and double check the work, double check what's happening with my contractor. Whereas before, when it was all in-house, it wasn't as much of an oversight. I also use my realtor to be an oversight to the contractor. So I have other people, other eyes, boots on the ground, being able to double check. And certainly photos before and after. But as we all know, you could get a photo of a different home and you can send it to the out-of-state investor. So I think those boots on the ground are just so critical to find a realtor that you are happy with, that you're someone who's hungry, that you trust, because he or she can oversee and be that trust factor and double check what the contractor's doing. Property managers, that's what they get paid for also, is to keep the properties up to speed. So that was another oversight, eyes on the ground, that I created.
Yeah. So do you compensate them for that? How did that work out? How did the discussion of, would you mind going to check on these things for me and this often and do these things and send me these pictures? I mean, how did all those conversations happen?
Yeah, the photos pretty much come from the contractors before and after their work. So they're compensated from their work. And the property managers charge, going rate is 10%. And once you get a portfolio, you can negotiate down to either 8 or 9%. So they get their compensation that way. And it's in their best interest to keep the property up to date also. So I don't overly compensate them if they need to stop by the property and double check. And the realtor just gets their compensation through repetition. I had the conversation with them of, hey, I'm an investor. I'm going to buy 10 times more than a home buyer. So they're happy to work with investors because of that sense of duplication and buying more properties. So that's how my realtors get compensated.
Nice. All right. So how often, how many properties are you looking at in order to get one of these deals that you're looking to get for roughly? Do you know those numbers?
I probably make offers on 5 to get 1 because, again, I'm buy and hold. So I don't need to buy at the rock bottom price. I probably look at maybe 25 properties, narrow it down to 5 offers to get 1 purchase, because I can offer going rate or a little bit less. I certainly negotiate with all the homeowners and try to get a good price, but I'm not in that narrow spread window, because if the underlying asset goes down in value a year from now, it's similar to your own home in that you just hang on and wait for the market to fluctuate and go back up. So the underlying asset price is not as critical to a buy and hold investor as it would be, say, to a flipper or to a wholesaler. There is a little bit more room for error there.
And what would you say would be great and, like a safe idea of reserves for investment strategy like this?
Yeah, that I learned the hard way, in that I was into such an acquisition mode. All of a sudden I looked down at my bank account and I thought, oh my gosh, if anything goes wrong here, I will really be out of money. So I learned that the hard way. So now I really try to keep about 6 months reserves. So if anything happens, a roof, a water tank, anything major, I really try to have a good chunk of reserves in hand, because I did not like that feeling when I got very low on available cash. And I thought, oh, I guess I'll have to sell something if need be. But who wants to be in that position where you're forced to sell just to raise cash quickly? So reserves, I think, are one of the most important areas, and yet the least talked about. It's not a sexy thing to talk about reserves, but it certainly makes us sleep better at night. And so what if we can't purchase an extra property? It's best to have several $1,000s, depending on how large your portfolio is, so you can weather 6 months storm regardless of what that is.
Yeah, no, that's important, because that's typically what will happen in any kind of unexpected turn of events for people. is the thing that everybody fears is this domino where, all of a sudden, something happens and it happened on one or two, but then that caused you to not be able to make payment on several others. And it just becomes this mess of like, runaway debt that's hard to figure out. So yeah, when it's strictly a buy and hold and having this, like having another way of generating some quick cash, I think is, if you don't already have the reserves, is a good thing to do. And if you've done the flipping, and I could imagine like if you wanted to start, doing the rehabs and flips in your market, now that you've done it remote, I'd imagine, you could even stay home and do it and not even have to, you know what I mean? Treat it as another remote market, even though you're there, and maybe save time. That probably saves you quite a bit of time because you're not tasked with going around and doing things that is better to have somebody else do.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Because again, I was so focused on that word passive. I wanted to do all of this and just create the systems and put the processes in place. So it was not me driving the train. I mean, in the back of the bus, I certainly am, but I really wanted other people out there doing the day to day, and I didn't want it to be dependent on my time frame. So I wanted it all to be a passive stream of income, and so far, it certainly has been.
Yeah. So what are your plans for the future with this?
Well, my number is more.
That's not a number.
So I'm still in acquisition mode. I'm still in single family market. Who knows down the road? Will I jump into multifamily perhaps? But at this point, I'm really happy at the single family. I'm happy with Section 8. So I would just like to acquire more. And wherever that number is, I will see where that takes me.
Right. So what are you learning right now? I mean, I bet you're somebody that's constantly learning. I mean, what are you focused on learning right now?
Yeah, I'm really focused on the processes, putting that in place and fine tuning my business and really understanding that the portfolio is a business and a life of its own. So just learning to work on my business rather than in my business and not create a day-to-day headache. So I'm really trying to delegate and make sure that someone else could step into this and all the pieces of the puzzle are working, whether I'm on vacation, whether I'm at my other job or not. And that's what I've been really trying to fine tune. And, so far I'm able to hold down a full-time job and still build a pretty good real estate portfolio.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Pretty impressive. Are you reading any good books that you would recommend to the listeners?
Probably one of my favorites was Dale Carnegie, How to Stop Worrying. Because everyone I run into, has so much stress and worry in their lives. And honestly, I really don't. And I think it's partly because of that book. And also I was a Dale Carnegie trained instructor. So that was one of my real go-to books. But it really does work. And there's so many principles in there. And I've really found that any problem that we can throw money at is not really a problem at all. And fortunately, in real estate, most problems are solved by money. So there's not a whole lot that we really need to stress over.
Nice. Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. For the systems and processes, is there anything that you're using to learn that? I mean, did you find a resource? How are you learning about the systems and processes?
No, just by reading the different books. The One Thing was one of the eye-opening books that I read to focus on the systems and processes and just making sure the property manager is autonomous doing their thing, that the contractor is accountable and shows up and does their thing. So it's trying to find the right people also on your team that don't need me to hold their hand, that are able to be professional on their own and create good work also.
Nice. All right. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience before we sign off?
No, I really
tips?
appreciate this opportunity. And I would say all your flipping audience, don't be afraid of buy and hold. Go ahead and add a couple to your portfolio. It can only help you down the road in your future. And it's been very exciting to be on your podcast. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
No, thank you, Rita. And if anybody wants to reach out to you and ask questions of you, are you open to that? And how can they reach you?
Certainly, anytime. Probably the easiest place to reach me would be on Bigger Pockets. I'm all over that site, and my email is on there on the profile, and all of that's probably the easiest. way.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Rita, and have a wonderful day. And good luck on getting your goal of more. I'm sure that you'll succeed just fine in that. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, keep in touch.
Okay, bye.